Hi, I'm Jeff Hirsch, and in this video I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the latest updates to Lightroom Classic. Version 13.3 has just been released by Adobe, and this update introduces a new tool that everybody has been waiting for. Let's get right to it. For the last year or so, Lightroom users have been looking over at Photoshop with a fair amount of understandable envy because of the AI-driven Generative Fill function that was added to Photoshop last May. And it's not because Lightroom editors particularly wanted to add unicorns and rainbows and laser beams to their photos with those generative AI features, but because the Generative Fill function in Photoshop is incredibly good at removing complex objects or distractions from a photo. I covered this in a couple of videos I did in the last year, showing just how effective Generative Fill is as an image repair tool. I'll add links to both videos in the description below. Well, if you're one of those people who keep asking, when are we getting that in Lightroom? The answer is today. Adobe has taken the same technology that drives Generative Fill in Photoshop, and they've used it to add a brand new Generative Remove tool to Lightroom. We now have a tool that can remove even the most complex and difficult blemishes from photos, just like Generative Fill does in Photoshop. And the best part is it's super easy to use, and it features a new object-aware option that does a great job of automatically finding and selecting objects for you when you go in to remove them. With Lightroom Classic 13.3, Adobe is introducing Remove with Generative Fill. In fact, the entire healing section has been renamed Remove. Here's how to use it. Open up the new Remove pane and choose the Eraser tool on the far left. The older Healing Band-Aid and Clone Stamp are still there as well if your repair needs are simpler. And with the Remove tool active, you'll want to enable the little checkboxes next to Generative AI and the Object Aware options in most cases. Now, if you're just doing small spots, you don't really need the AI assist. It works fine without it. But for more complex image repairs, you should leave those options on. The Object Aware checkbox is used to select a specific object that you want removed. It tries to find the edges of things and mask them off for you with a little extra overlap to help the blending. The idea is to cover an area slightly larger than the area or the object that you wish to remove, because like Generative Fill, the Generative Remove algorithm needs a little bit of the surrounding pixels to blend in properly. So start by painting over the area with the Selection tool, and as always, the square bracket keys will make the brush larger or smaller as you're painting with it. And after painting the area you wish to remove, you'll automatically be put into a refine mode where you can then tweak that initial selection by brushing in or brushing out areas with the little brush that you have before applying the Generative Remove. Just like the Generative Fill function in Photoshop, after it's applied, you'll be given 3 variations to choose from, and you can cycle between them and pick the one you like. If you don't like any of them, you can generate another set of 3 variations by clicking the Refresh button. Let's jump in with a bunch of live demos so you can see just how easy and effective this tool is. We'll start with this photo taken in a lumber yard. I'd like to remove the large piece of equipment in the upper right-hand corner, and I think the Remove tool can do a great job of it. Just a reminder that the Q key is your keyboard shortcut to open up any of the Remove tools, and I've already selected that Generative Remove eraser on the left, and the options have been turned on for both Generative AI and Object Aware, so it can hopefully find the edges of the object I'm trying to mask off. I'll make my brush a little bit bigger with the bracket keys here, and then I will just very quickly paint over the area of the object I wish to remove. When I let go of the clicker, that object aware option has found the edges of it and extended them just a little bit so that it'll do a better job of blending with the background. I don't need to make any refinements to the selection, so I'll go ahead and click the Apply button and let the Generative Remove put a new patch there. It will generate 3 variations for me, and I can toggle through them by clicking the Variations button here. That's 1. That's variation number 2. That's variation number 3. I think I like 2 or 3 the best. Let's say we go with 3. Notice also that the Generative Remove patch has taken into account the lighting and shadows, the angle of the light, the depth of field, the fact that that area back towards the back of the frame is a little more blurry and out of focus. It's smart enough to recognize all those things about the original scene and try and make a better patch. In this case, let's go ahead and take out the large set of doorbells in the upper right-hand corner of this picture. And for this demo, I'm just going to paint around the outside edges of this with my brush, and I'm not even going to bother to fill in the insides, because with that object aware selection turned on, most of the time it does a good job of finding the object I want to remove. Now in this case, it decided that some of this upper area was also intended for removal, and so it's included that in the area that it's going to patch out. If I don't want that to be part of this, I can use these refinement tools to add or subtract. So I'll click Subtract here, and I'll erase out the parts of this that I don't want to get patched out so that that little line gets kept there. Now that I've refined the masked area to just the way I want it, I'll click the Apply button, and we'll let the Generative Remove make some patches for us. As is the case with the previous one, we'll get 3 variations we can choose from. There's number 1, number 2, and number 3. I think I like number 1 the best, so that's the one that I would keep. Let's move on to a slightly more complicated example. I'd like to remove the figure from the doorway here, just to see if we can do it. I'm going to make my brush just a little bit smaller, and I'll come in here and I will paint around the edges of the figure. You'll notice I'm not being too fussy or precise here. I'm going to mostly rely on the object aware to find the edges of this object. Now you'll notice when it made this selection, it also selected a little bit of the door frame here. And if my results are such when I patch this that it's removing some of this door frame, I might come back and erase some of this area. I'll switch to my regular paintbrush, but I'll hold the Option or Alt key down to temporarily switch it into eraser. And this way I can come in and I can remove a little bit of the area from that door frame that might have gotten patched out. I'll leave a little bit of overlap because I do want it to blend nicely with the background. And then I'll hit the Apply button, and let's see what the Generative Remove can do with the scene behind where our figure was standing. Can it make a patch that has the depth and shadow and light of this room? And the answer is it does a pretty good job. That's variation number 1. Here's 2, and here's 3. I think I like 3 the best. Let's see, before and after. That sure looks like a pretty natural removal. Could probably convince my eyes that 1 works as well, but I didn't like the windows that it brought back in. So I'm going to stick with 3 for my patch there. But notice how it's taken into account the geometry of this scene, the perspective, the fact that it's back in shadow back there, that it should be darker, and it's done a nice job of naturally removing the figure and rebuilding the scene behind the figure. That's something I really appreciate about this Generative Remove business. It does an excellent job reconstructing what's underneath. This will be similar to the last example that we did. If I want to take the figure out of here, a very quick little brush around it. Make sure I include her backpack there. And when I let go, it does a pretty darn good job of finding the edges of her. So I don't really need to refine this mask. I can go ahead and hit the Apply button, and I'll get 3 variants. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. They're pretty much all suitable replacements. And in this demo, I want to show you a little bit about why I like those refine tools so much. And some of my students will recognize these images. These are sample images we've been using for years to test out the image repair tools in both Lightroom and Photoshop. And when a new tool comes along, I like to pull up some of these older images to see how well the tools can deal with the same problems we've been solving for years. So I'd like to patch the stucco on the outside of this building here. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller. I'll come in here and I'll brush over the edges of this area. We'll see if it's smart enough to fill in this whole patch for me. It does a pretty good job, but you can see that it's picked up a little bit of the corner of the shutter and the window frame here, and I don't want those to get removed. I actually want them to be preserved. So I'm going to hold the Option or Alt key to turn my refine brush temporarily into an eraser so that I can come in here and I can erase these little bits right there and say, hey, don't remove those. I actually want to keep those little bits. Can also add back in any areas that it may have missed. If I wanted it to take out this little line up here or this little line over here, I can add those to the area that's being patched. Now when I hit the Apply button, it should do a better job of preserving these little corner details here. And remember, if it doesn't patch it the way you like, you can refine that area and fix it later. So in this case, I think I like version number 3 on that one. And look at how well it preserved that corner. Did a nice job. It actually cleaned it up for us a little bit. All right, now let's see if we can take that other little area out. I'll paint over it with my brush. And when I let go of the mouse, the object aware will find the edges of it. And you know, it may have gotten a little close to that edge there, so I might just paint in a little bit extra to make sure that it's going to take those little bits out. I'll click the Apply button, wait for the Generative Remove, and then pick the variation I like. I'm pretty happy with the first one. That's 1, that's 2, and that's 3. I think either 1 or 3 are just lovely. And so very quickly we've been able to do some home repairs here. Here's your before, and here's your after, where we got in there and did some nice stucco work. I wish real home repairs were that easy. Here's another example of an image I've used in my classes for years and years. Let's see how well Generative Remove does with this one. And again, I'm really only making a rough outline in this case and relying on the fact that the object aware can probably find the difference between this yellow scoop and the rest of the sun-dried tomatoes. And it did a good job, but not perfect. It missed this little bit up here, so we'll add that in to our mask there. And then I'll go ahead and I'll click the Apply button and I'll ask it to patch that out for us. And it did a fantastic job. There's variant 1, 2, and 3. Pretty much any of these is a convincing patch. The new Generative Remove tool in Lightroom is so good that I find myself needing to go over to Photoshop far less frequently than I did before. Many of the tasks that I used to need Photoshop to do in terms of image repair and removal, I can now do very effectively without ever having to leave Lightroom. Here's a perfect example. I'd love to remove all of the tourists in this picture except in the man in the red hat. Everybody else I'd like to be gone from the picture, and I'd like to do it without ever having to leave Lightroom. Here's the before, and here's the after. And all of this was done using Generative Remove. If I actually bring my cursor in, you can see that there are many, many little patches in here. And that if I hover over each one of them, you can see they are differing sizes and shapes based on the little bits that had to be removed here. Here's the before, and here's the after. And these are all natural looking patches. They blend in beautifully. There's nowhere where I look around and see an obvious seam. It's doing a lovely job of patching these in naturally. Once again, here's before with all of the tourists, and here's after where we only have the man in the red hat remaining. Here's another example of where I'm able to make a very complex patch using Generative Remove that I would have otherwise gone to Photoshop for. The original photo had 3 figures on the right-hand side, and I found them distracting, and I wanted to remove them, and these were taken out using only the Generative Remove. Here's an example I used to give to my Photoshop students as a challenge. Can you remove the central column here without really messing up the rest of the picture? Well, as it turns out, Generative Remove in Lightroom can do it pretty much in one try. There's your after. Before and after, and I did not ever have to go over to Photoshop and play with any of the image repair tools there. Generative Remove could do it here for me. Now that you've seen the basics of how this tool works, I'd like to give you a few tips and tricks for making the most of the new Remove tool. Try to keep in mind that this tool was designed for removing small to medium-sized distractions from your photos. It's a smarter version of the content-aware Remove tool that it replaces in the Lightroom toolbox. And like the Generative Fill function in Photoshop, the maximum size of a Generative Remove patch is limited to 2000 by 2000 pixels. So don't expect it to do huge patches without some loss in quality compared to the surrounding area. Here's a perfect example. I can use the Remove tool to take out Mr. Pujols here from the photograph, but the area that I'm covering is a fairly large area here. And since the size of our patch is limited to 2000 by 2000 pixels, the patch that I make has to be spread out to cover the entire area here. And as such, it's probably going to be of a lower quality than the surrounding area. So let's go ahead and make that patch. It's a rather large one. And once it's replaced him, at our 3 variations here. So let's say we go with variation number 2. If I zoom in really close down here, you can actually see where our patch begins and ends. On the left side here, we have the original image quality, and there's a lot of detail. And on the right side of this line, everything gets softer and blurrier, and that's because our 2000 pixel patch is being stretched out to cover the entire area. So try and keep in mind that this tool is designed for removing spots, smaller and medium-sized elements, and isn't designed for taking out such large features. For best results, if your object has a shadow beneath it, be sure to erase the shadow as well as the object, or the Generative Remove routine will try to fill it back in with something that's casting that shadow. In this example, I've masked off the chicken I wish to remove from this photograph, but I haven't masked off the shadow that's falling behind that chicken. And when I apply the Generative Remove patch, the AI is going to look at that shadow and think that there's something that should be casting it, and in this case it's thrown down a couple of objects, in this case flowers and a funnel, that it thinks are supposed to be part of this because I didn't take that shadow out. Well, this is a good time for me to use that refine option. I'm going to click the refine button here, and it brings back my original mask, and I can actually add in the areas that I wish to add. In this case, let's make sure that that shadow gets included so that when the Generative Remove application is done, it knows not to try and bring something back in to cast a shadow. And in this case, we should get some very good looking results. There's variation number 1, number 2, and number 3, and in all 3 cases, they look perfectly natural. If you're working small spots, you can save time by turning off the Generative AI. It still works very well without the AI assist, and it doesn't rely on an internet connection, which the Generative Remove does. If you hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC while you are painting with the brush or the eraser, you will temporarily switch to the opposite. If you have the brush, it'll switch you to the eraser. If you're erasing, it'll temporarily switch you to the brush. This makes for easy swapping between the painting and erasing tools as you are refining your selection to make it more precise. And like the masking tools we have in Lightroom, you can also change the color and the opacity of the overlay that indicates your selected area. Now here's one very important workflow tip I want to suggest to you all. I suggest that you do any removal of elements that you wish to take out of your images before you go in and do any kind of masking work. Because if not, you'll probably need to go back in and update your masks to reflect the elements that you have removed. Let me show you a live demonstration of how this works and why it's useful for you to go ahead and do your removal before you create your masks, and how you can go in and fix a mask if you've done the removal afterwards. For this demonstration, I'd like to take out the flower bud that's in the background of this photo. Q will pick up my healing tools, run up along the stem here, and around the head of this flower, and let's see how the Object Aware does. It does a nice job. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the Apply button here, and it will patch out this flower. It'll remove it completely from the underlying pixels. Which it did, but there's also this odd sort of light halo going on here. And this is because masking was done to this picture before that element was removed. So if I go over and I open up my masking tools, I will find that there's a background mask that was used to select everything except the foreground objects. And it had previously reflected the fact that that other flower was there. But now that that flower's gone, I need to update this mask so that I don't end up with this strange lighter area there. And I can select the mask here, and I can go over to the masking panel here, and there's an update button. And when I press that button, the AI-driven background mask will update itself to reflect the fact that I've taken that element out, and now the mask has been updated and looks much better, and you don't have that strange ghostly artifact. So this is why it makes more sense to remove any elements you want to take out before you do your masking. Otherwise, you're going to have to come back and update a mask. Now, with those AI-driven masks for subject and object and people and sky and background, it's very easy. You just press the button and it will update that mask for you. If the mask was done with one of the other simpler tools like the paintbrush, you may have to go in there and manually paint your mask back in. Just a couple of more tips about the Generative Remove tool, and then we can talk about the rest of the new features. One is that if you'd like, you can actually skip automatically being taken into the refine mode after your initial painting of a subject by holding down the command when you're marking the area you wish to remove. And this means that as soon as you let go of the clicker, the patch will get generated without any further refinement. I don't find myself using that all that often. Now, there's one big question that hasn't yet been answered, and that is if this Generative Remove feature uses up generative credits like the Generative Fill features and Generative AI features in all of Adobe's other programs that do use generative credits. So far, Adobe has not issued any guidance on the subject, and they've changed their rollout timing of generative credits several times in recent months. So it's hard to know which way they're going with this one. I'm going to assume they'll eventually make it part of the generative credit system like all the others. I guess we'll know soon enough. Aside from the Generative Remove feature that was added in Lightroom 13.3, there are a number of smaller features I'd like to point out as well. And the first one is that with Lightroom Classic 13.3, your catalog will be updated. Anything that's 13.2 or older catalog will get updated to work with the new features that are in 13.3. And what happens is a copy of your older catalog gets made, and it's that copy that gets updated. The old catalog is still there and it won't be changed at all, but the preview cache will be taken over by the new catalog. The folks at Adobe have updated the preview file management and generation for what we hope is smoother and faster experience as we browse through our images. They've made a number of performance updates as well, including adding GPU support to the preview generation. So hopefully your image previews get generated a little bit faster now. You can go in and check your GPU settings by going into Preferences and then the Performance sub-tab and look for Use Graphics Processor. The performance updates also give us smoother image navigation while we are in the Develop module. You should get enhanced responsiveness while you're navigating your images on the film strip there, especially with virtual copies. They've also given faster AI denoise performance for those of you who are running Macintosh computers with Apple Silicon CPUs in them. The Apple Neural Engine has been enabled for the AI denoise for anybody that's got an Apple Silicon computer, but you do have to be running macOS 14 or later, so you need to have the latest Sonoma installed in your computer. At long last, Adobe has added tethered support for tethered capture for most Sony cameras, including the Alpha 1, the A7R4, the 9, the 7S, and some of their lower models, the 6700. That's not a limit to the list. There's actually a bunch more that are supported, but those are the ones that we know for certain are working. Lightroom 13.3 also includes some improvements to the new lens blur feature. The lens blur AI models have been updated to address what they called quality issues, and I can confirm that they do seem to work a little bit better. And with Lightroom 13.3, Adobe has added support for doing batch operations that involve lens blur, which means you can put it in presets, you can copy and paste those settings, you can sync or auto-sync those settings. They've also updated the user interface in the lens blur tool to show near and far labels in that little focus range graph in the middle. Once you move that focus range around, it'll show you those values in numbers. And because they've added support for lens blur to be put into presets, they have added a number of new adaptive presets. They've got 7 background blur effects designed to make your subject stand out in a single click. We have a few library changes. With Lightroom Classic 13.3, Adobe has added support to know if an image has been exported or published. This can be achieved using the attribute filter in the library or grid or film strip. Images are either exported or not exported. You can also go into the metadata filter and look for exported files, and you can now use exported files as a smart collection criteria. And they've also added an option where you can reset the export status of any picture. You can go into the photo menu or the contextual menu if you're in a folder or a collection or an image. You can just tell Lightroom, reset the export status. You don't think that this has been exported anymore. And then they've added one more new field in the metadata panel, which you can enable in the customization, that has the last exported date. That's very handy, as I found myself going into the history to try and figure out when I had exported a picture. And with Lightroom Classic 13.3, they have added an option, has point color, in your smart collections and your filters, so you can now filter for and find any images where you've applied that point color adjustment that they've added. And of course, with the latest update, we get new support for cameras, lenses, and bug fixes, as always. So that's everything you need to know about the latest update to Lightroom Classic version 13.3 and the amazing new Generative Remove tool. For more Lightroom and Photoshop videos, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and go ahead and click the bell icon to get notified anytime I post a new video. And if you aren't already on my mailing list, head over to jeffhirsch.com and sign up for the mailing list, and you'll get updates on my classes and workshops and trips, along with bonus tutorial videos and articles for Photoshop and Lightroom. I promise not to spam your inbox, and I will never ever sell your address to a third party. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.